And again, welcome to today's webinar, IDC and AWS Joint Webinar, Getting the Most Bang for Your Buck with EC2 Spot. Our presenters today are Joshua Bergen with AWS, Larry Carvalho and Matthew Martin with IDC, and Will White with Mapbox. Today with us, we also have a team of moderators, Sebastian, Boyd, and Chad. They'll be engaging with you and answering the questions that you have during the webinar itself. So make sure to test their typing skills and give them something to do. Joshua, Larry, Matt, and Will, welcome. The floor is now yours.
Hello, everyone. My name is Joshua Bergen, and I'm the General Manager for the EC2 Spot business here at Amazon Web Services. I wanted to thank you all for joining us at today's webinar on Amazon EC2 Spot instances, how they're enabling companies of all sizes to scale their infrastructure, save big, and accelerate their business results. We've seen AWS customers increasingly adopting EC2 Spot, and we wanted to dive a bit deeper on how Spot can lower your compute costs, decrease your time to results, and give you the freedom to say yes more often. First, I'd like to introduce you to my other co-presenters here today. I'm going to start with Larry Carvalho and Matthew Martin from IDC, who interviewed a range of AWS customers to better understand how they use Spot and what business results they're use worldwide cloud platform and developer services research practice. He contributes to many projects that measure the value of enterprise transformation cloud initiatives, including business value, ROI, and ownership studies. Matthew is a research manager on the IDC Business Value Strategy team. He is responsible for carrying out business value research in a number of technology areas, with a focus on determining the results and the return on investment for their use of enterprise technologies. I'm also excited that we're joined by Will White from Mapbox. Will is the VP of Platform at Mapbox, designing their APIs and data processing pipelines and managing their AWS infrastructure so they can quickly and reliably serve over 200 million users around the world. During today's webinar, he will share how Mapbox leverages EC2 Spot to scale their AWS infrastructure, save big, and accelerate their time to results. With those introductions out of the way, let me hand you over to Larry from IDC, who will walk you through IDC's research and predictions about the cloud.
Thank you, Joshua. I want to start by outlining a few of IDC's 2020 cloud predictions and providing some insight as to why products like Amazon EC2 Spot instances can drive business value and accelerate some of the trends we have been observing. So with that, on the first slide, what we see is there is a significant growth in public cloud adoption, and the spending is growing. What this does to cloud service providers is they have to expand their infrastructure to meet this demand ahead of utilization. At the same time, demand for on-demand compute resources in the cloud can fluctuate. As a result, there are resources not fully utilized that AWS provides at a great price. That is a win-win from both providers and its users that we have seen from these interviews we have done. So what AWS Spot instances do is allow you to bid on spare EC2 computing capacity at an optimal price point. This gives AWS a revenue stream for resources that would otherwise be unutilized, while it also allows users to benefit from new business models, running stateless applications with a higher throughput, and saving money in all their workloads from batch, Hadoop, or CI/CD. We are seeing that AWS customers can significantly reduce the cost of running applications, grow an application's compute capacity and throughput for the same budget, while enabling new types of cloud computing applications. So on the next slide, we're going to, there are two things we are looking at from our predictions. What we see on the first bullet is customers look for unique pricing models to deliver new solutions. The availability of large public capacities public cloud capacities that is not financially viable in on-premise instances gives users a much faster throughput for obtaining results. The second bullet, talks about what we have seen and new digitally enhanced products that are now possible by leveraging massive public cloud resources. Digital transformation of companies require unique and differentiating capabilities. For example, processing workloads not possible before but now at a reasonable price point. So with that, I'm going to talk on the next slide a little bit about how customers are gaining value. So what we are seeing is that there is a speed of innovation that was not possible before. Some functions and features and functions that were adding value to both the users and the customers. And as a result, customers are able to take additional risks and develop new business models very quickly at a lower price point. And finally, that price point can be used as a competitive edge. With that, I'll turn it back to Joshua to talk about the EC2 Spot instances.
Thanks, Larry. Really appreciate it. I wanted to talk about how the cloud is different. Larry kind of alluded to this a little bit. When you think about your IT infrastructure and how it works with your business, you tend to think about making advanced purchases, signing 3-year contracts. The cloud really turns this on its head. Whether you're sharing photos to millions of mobile users, whether you're supporting critical operations of your business, Cloud Services Platform provides rapid access to flexible and low-cost IT resources. With AWS, you don't need to make those large upfront investments in hardware. You don't need to spend a lot of time on the heavy lifting for managing that hardware. Instead, you can provision exactly the right type and size of computing resources that you need to power your new bright ideas or operate your IT department. You can access as many of these resources as you need almost instantly, and you only pay for what you use. You can accelerate your projects without spending too much money. And I'm going to dive a little bit more into that on the next few slides. I mentioned this on the previous slide, but AWS has 4 key pricing principles. One is no upfront investment. This is pretty straightforward. You're not required to sign 3-year contracts or even 1-year contracts. You can simply get started with on-demand or spot instances without a lot of upfront setup. And then as part of this, you pay as you go. So paying as you go is actually super powerful. Maybe you don't know how big your use is going to grow. Maybe you're a startup. Maybe you're somebody in your garage. Maybe you're an enterprise getting on board with the cloud. But once you get on board, we also have the ability for you to pay less when you reserve using our reserved instance purchasing model. And I'll talk about that in the next few slides. And lastly, I think this is really powerful. You pay less when AWS grows. What we mean here is that we've continued to innovate on behalf of our customers and continued to grow and scale. We pass those savings onto you, our customers, in the form of over 50 price reductions since 2006. I think when you put this all together, it's really powerful. So I mentioned the purchasing options on the previous slide, and here they are compared to each other. For EC2, there's 3 core purchasing options, and we're going to discuss how you can leverage them together to get the highest availability and performance while minimizing cost. We're going to focus on Spot for most of today's webinar. Options are on demand, where you pay for compute capacity by the hour, no long-term commitments. This is great to get started, not a lot of thought needed. You can use this for your spiky workloads, defining your needs, and so on. Second, I mentioned this, our reserved instance purchasing model. So here you make a 1 or a 3-year commitment to AWS, and you receive a significant discount over on demand, up to 75% off the on-demand price for our 3-year RIs. This is the perfect option for your committed or baseline usage, where you're running something 24/7, or it absolutely must stay up and running. And the last, near and dear to my heart, is Spot. Here you're paying a market price for our unused compute capacity, and you're getting a steep discount over on demand. This is perfect for your fault-tolerant, opportunistic, time-insensitive, or transient workloads. And I'm really pleased that we have Will here from Mapbox, who's going to go into exactly how some of our customers are using this to power their business. On-demand, as I mentioned, is great for low-cost and flexible workloads, for developing and testing, for short-term, spiky, and unpredictable work. It's for users that want the low cost and flexibility of the cloud of Amazon EC2 without any upfront payment, or long-term commitment. Again, reserved instances are for your steady-state workloads. You have the ability to have a capacity reservation or the flexibility to use your reserved instances across multiple availability zones and have the discount apply to any of your running instances that you've paid for. And you can make upfront payments or not to help further reduce your costs. And as I mentioned, for time flexibility, a large amount of additional compute capacity and you need it urgently, These are the kinds of things people are doing on Spot across all industries and all market segments. When I say significant savings, I want to highlight exactly how much those savings are. You can save up to 90% off of the on-demand compute prices. We have tools like Spot Fleet. This helps you maintain the availability of your Spot instances as maybe they come and go over time. We have Spot Blocks. These are designed for workloads that must run continuously but still want to take advantage of Spot, and you simply specify whether you want 1, 2, 3, or 6 hours of availability, and you don't have to make any commitment. There's no upfront pricing. There's no commitment to using a certain amount of capacity. So when you're wondering, what is a 90% discount? How do I think about this? This is about 1 cent per core hour. So you want to ask yourself, what could your best people do, or how well could your application perform with a 10,000 core data center that costs you just $100 per hour? Spot is a little bit different than on-demand and reserved, so I wanted to kind of dive into it in a little bit detail. There's a pretty simple market mechanism, and again, you save up to 90% off the on-demand price. The two key things to remember is that you're never going to pay more than your bid, which you can kind of think of as a max price, but you actually pay the market price. So in this example we have here, which is from our price history graph that it's available on our website and also from an API, you're saving, as you can see from the market price, 85% off the on-demand price. So even if you bid 25%, 50%, 75%, or 100% as your maximum price that you're willing to pay, you're only paying the market price. That's what this blue line is here moving along. And when the market price moves over your maximum price, your instance is reclaimed by EC2, and you have a 2-minute notification to wrap up your work. So if you bid 25% as your max price, you kept your instance for almost 7 days, only being impacted during these 2 short periods where you see those little spikes where the market moved up. And again, you saved 85% off. At 50%, you only would have been interrupted 1 time over the entire week for a very short period of time during that 6th day, but you still saved 84% on average for the entire week because, again, you pay the market price. So taking this one step further, if you bid that your maximum price you were ever willing to pay for this Spot instance was 75% of the on-demand price, you still saved that same 84%. You weren't interrupted at all for this entire week, and you still saved 84%. One key thing to note is that Spot instances, reserved instances, on-demand instances, these really actually aren't different kinds of instances. They're all the same underlying instances, the same type of hardware, the same performance specs. They're just different purchasing models that give you the ability to save more money or meet your kind of computing needs overall. So again, the important thing to remember is a Spot instance, an on-demand instance, a reserved instance. It's the same underlying type of compute and same power, just different purchasing models. So lastly, we've also released very recently something we call the Spot Advisor. The Spot Advisor is a very simple tool you can find on our website where you can put in your computing requirements, how many CPUs you need, what your minimum memory footprint is, what kind of platform you're using, how many Spot instances you need. And we're going to recommend a fleet of Spot instances, kind of take all the heavy lifting for you out of figuring out how do I use these Spot instances. And one of the cool things about Spot instances is even if you're interrupted, if we interrupt you, you don't actually pay for that fraction of the hour that you were using for the last hour. So I've gone over these 3 purchasing models, and you might be asking yourself, how do I pick which purchasing model that I use? I don't know for my application. So we like to think this is the wrong question. It's like picking a single type of food and eating only that food for the rest of your life. You should have a balanced meal. Every application can use at least some Spot, some on-demand, and some reserved instances. Some applications are going to be heavier on the reserved instances and lighter on the Spot. Some applications might be nearly all Spot with a base of reserved instances. So when you think about your workloads, your CI/CD workloads, your database and ETL jobs, your web tier, your application tier, you want to think to yourself, how do I take maximum advantage of the different purchasing models, blending them together to save money and accelerate my application? So with that in mind,
Very much, Joshua. I'm Matt Martin, Research Manager for IDC's Business Value Strategy Practice. It's a real pleasure for me to be here today to discuss the results of our study that we carried out with regard to AWS customer use of EC2 Spot instances. By the time I've gone through the next few slides, you'll understand the nature of the project we carried out for AWS, IDC's business value methodology, and the most salient value points in customer use of EC2 Spot instances. At core, IDC study was about understanding the value of EC2 Spot instances by speaking with organizations that are using them to support their business operations. In total, we interviewed 7 AWS customers using EC2 Spot instances. To understand the impact of Spot on them, we asked them about the impact of Spot on their IT and business operations in terms of compute cost, IT staff time support requirements, development-related activities, IT agility, and the impact on their businesses. The metrics collected from these interviews with AWS customers informs an aggregated model that we developed that in turn served as the business value analysis for the white paper. We published the white paper in February of this year. You can see an image of the first page on the right side of this slide, as well as a business value snapshot, which I'll show you in just a minute, and a standalone executive summary. This next slide is one of the deliverables from our work that I just mentioned, the IDC Business Value Snapshot, which provides an overview of the most important results from our research. These results that you can see on this slide reflect the value that interviewed organizations, so AWS customers, are achieving with EC2 Spot instances. As you can see, they're achieving a strong return on their investment of 220% over 5 years, or more than a 3-to-1 return, realizing nearly $8.6 million of benefits per organization over 5 years, and breaking even in their investment in EC2 Spot instances in only 3 months, which reflects very fast time to value for these AWS customers. These top-line results are driven by the operational impact metrics shown in the middle of this slide. In other words, how these organizations are benefiting from Spot. You can see 64% lower compute cost on average, 13% faster application delivery thanks to enhanced compute scalability and agility, and 8% higher application developer productivity. These types and scale of impact translate to financial value for study participants. The orange boxes at the bottom of the page show how IDC quantified this value on a per application basis. We'll talk about these areas of value in just 1 second. First, I wanted to say a few words about the profile of the AWS customers we interviewed for the study. The AWS customers interviewed have several thousand employees on average and several hundred by median. The sample included leading companies in the social media and crowdsource segments, including Mapbox, who we'll hear from regarding their experiences with EC2 Spot instances in just a few minutes. These organizations are supporting substantial workloads with EC2 Spot. They're using tens of thousands of Spot server instances and supporting about 150 business applications on average. All of these organizations are also either using Amazon EC2 Reserved or Amazon EC2 On Demand. In terms of use case, these AWS customers' use is centered on large-scale data processing and batch processes that are time-sensitive, as well as testing environments and some ad hoc use cases. This next slide shows the value that study participants are achieving with EC2 Spot instances. These are the same numbers that you saw on the last slide, as well as an overall statement about the value they're realizing at an organizational level. As you can see, the most significant area of value we quantified for this study is in terms of IT infrastructure cost savings. In other words, these organizations' savings on compute with EC2 Spot instances. However, the value of compute savings, as well as IT operational efficiencies enabled by Spot, extend to helping enable these organizations' businesses through scalability, flexibility, agility, and minimizing the extent to which friction to the purchase, procurement, and deployment of compute resources can slow down their business processes. EC2 Spot instances also enabled IT staff time savings and higher levels of efficiency for these organizations, especially for teams managing applications and infrastructure, as well as their application development teams. This means that these teams are able to deliver more value on a per application basis with EC2 Spot, as reflected on this slide. Finally, EC2 Spot instances enable business for these organizations, as I mentioned, and can deliver operational efficiencies. These values are quantified in the business productivity benefits category on this slide in red. This category of value includes higher revenue attributable to EC2 Spot instances for reasons that we'll discuss, as well as efficiencies in the form of higher user productivity due to the ability to deliver applications faster and mitigate compute resource constraints as a factor in how certain employees work. Taken together, this represents the overall value proposition for EC2 Spot. You can see cost savings plus efficiencies translate to business enablement for these organizations. The next slide I'm showing shows the dramatic impact for study participants of using EC2 Spot instances in terms of their compute costs. They're achieving 64% lower compute costs on average, as I already mentioned. This value aligns with what was generally the initial driver of these organizations' use of EC2 Spot instances. They wanted to make their compute environments as cost-effective as possible. As we'll discuss, these study participants are also leveraging EC2 Spot as a cost-effective and scalable compute resource to spur innovation at the IT and business levels. So that cost factor goes hand in hand with business enablement. By organization, study participants report reducing their compute costs with EC2 Spot by between about 50 and 90%. These organizations mostly came into being as AWS and or cloud infrastructure users, and they've increased their use of EC2 Spot as they've achieved much lower compute costs without sacrificing the reliability, performance, and manageability that they require. Examples of these cost savings by organization included one organization saving up to 90% on compute. You can see the quote on this slide. And doing this without compromising continuity or requiring significant additional time in terms of investment. Another organization talked about estimating that it would need 6,000 servers to do what it's doing with EC2 Spot instances, which is allowing it to avoid a potentially huge infrastructure build-out through its use of EC2 Spot. EC2 Spot instances have also enabled these organizations to achieve staff efficiencies in terms of developing applications and features, as well as managing infrastructure resources and applications. You saw the metrics related to application development already. 13% faster development cycles and 8% higher developer productivity on average. In several instances for these organizations, EC2 Spot instances have changed how these organizations approach development because they know they'll have the compute resources they need with less regard for price, thereby making certain limitations for development less relevant with EC2 Spot. In terms of IT staff management, the relative difference is not necessarily huge, as most of these organizations were already using cloud compute resources or would otherwise be in the cloud with AWS or another provider for these workloads. However, there were several organizations that reported to reduce, even to a more significant extent, the amount of staff time required to manage applications with EC2 Spot, especially by taking steps to automate the provisioning of Spot compute resources, which they said removed some of the legwork involved with supporting these applications. Taken alone, the cost savings and IT staff efficiencies we've discussed would justify these study participants' investment in EC2 Spot instances. But it's in terms of the business enablement where value with Spot can accrue and multiply even more quickly. As I mentioned, study participants are leveraging the scalability and flexibility of EC2 Spot instances to change how they carry out the provisioning of compute resources to support their business operations, which in turn can have a positive impact on their overall businesses. Going through the list on this slide, EC2 Spot instances can provide true compute scalability for well-architected organizations. The price of compute becomes less of a bottleneck for them, and having access to compute resources at little notice also enhances their scalability and business flexibility. This can be leveraged to potentially change how organizations carry out business, especially with regard to types of activities, such as development activities, as I discussed, where costs must be considered in even justifying provisioning the resources needed to execute them. As a result, AWS customers reported that EC2 Spot instances helps them ensure that they don't lose out on potential benefits associated with these activities. Faster time to market is another benefit for these organizations because of the ability they now have with Spot to access compute as needed, with pricing playing a less significant role in the decisions that they make about provisioning compute resources. And finally, EC2 Spot instances can be a competitive differentiator for organizations where a service depends on having a cost-effective compute basis, and savings can actually be passed through to end customers, which in turn makes these organizations' services more attractive and can potentially help them increase their market share. And this slide presents this impact in terms of revenue. You can see more than $3 million per organization per year of additional revenue that they attributed to their use of EC2 Spot instances in the ways that we've discussed. This reflects the fact that for these organizations, EC2 Spot instances are really a competitive differentiator. For purposes of IDC's model, we apply a standard 15% operating margin assumption to that top-line revenue number, which is what IDC does in business value studies to reflect the fact that there are generally other costs involved with achieving higher revenue. Is about that per year on average of additional revenue. Study participants provided a number of examples during interviews of how EC2 Spot instances have enabled their businesses. Again, you can see a quote from one of these customers on this slide. For this customer, Spot is supporting faster experimentation for its customers with its core service because of the price and availability of compute resources, which in turn is helping this organization support faster proof of concepts and thereby higher revenue as it turns through these prospects in less time. Another organization has sped up its software development process, enabling it to release faster and then run its services at a lower cost, which enables it to provide better customer service and in the end improve its business results. And finally, another study participant is embedding EC2 Spot instances in its customer-facing services and credits Spot with making its services more compelling and price competitive, which in turn has had a positive impact on its business prospects. My colleague Larry will go over a few customer highlights from the IDC study and then introduce Will from Mapbox to discuss their specific background and use case in a bit more detail. Larry?
Thanks, Matt. So I'm going to go over some of the responses and, some unique and things that you can go back with. And then obviously Will go in a little more deep dive on what they got. But what we found is, some of these customers are trying to do market analysis. So how can they do these what-if scenarios before they make some decisions, investment decisions? As a result, they can do many more and at a much lower cost, giving them a better view of where they should move to. The second one is, the second bullet on this, one of our customers said it makes their applications inherently fault tolerant. So given the fact that you might lose it, gives them a better understanding and best practice of how to build their applications. And typically the applications that we found on the third bullet are usually stateless and non-urgent. And they are now finding that a lot new applications are being built on Spot. And, that's what they are leading, for their future plans. And finally, their accelerated testing because of the ability to capture large amounts of resources in a short amount of time leads to faster time to market. This is extremely important in this current digital transformation age by customers wanting to move faster and keep up with future disruptors in their market. So with that, I'll have Will, the VP of Platform at Mapbox, one of the companies we interviewed, who joined us today, take a look at their specific benefits of Spot based on his experience. Will?
Thanks very much. This is Will. I'm the VP of Platform at Mapbox. Mapbox is a location company for developers. So we provide APIs that allow developers to add location to any application. Those location services are delivered as APIs, like a search API to help you find places around the world, a maps API to help you see the world visually, and a directions API to help you get around the world with point A to point B routing. We provide these services as SDKs that are really developer friendly, and developers at the top brands of the web and around the world love our APIs. One of our most popular products is our traffic product. And you might be familiar with a map that looks like this. On your morning commute, you have the road network, in this case, San Francisco, and you have each segment of the road network is colored based on how much congestion is on the road. Green means things are clear, yellow means, yellow or orange means things are, medium congestion, and then red is when it's really bad, bumper to bumper traffic. Not sure how many people really think about what goes into making a map like this, and it actually starts out looking like this. We collect data, anonymized data from our SDKs on mobile, iOS and Android. We collect that data as points. It appears as latitude and longitude points. And what we do is we string those points together into these aggregated and anonymized data streams that attach to the road network. This data covers intersections and interchanges like this one, entire cities. This is Washington, D.C. And it actually covers entire countries, United States and the world. We collect this data and use it to build better data products that improves our maps and helps us build maps like the traffic map. We're running on all of this on EC2 Spot, both the data processing side, but also the hosting of our API. We're processing 3.7 billion GPS probes, which is enough to cover about 150 million miles of the road network every single day. Over 30,000 requests per second. Our platform has over 55,000 active developers on the platform, and we're reaching over 250 million unique users every month. So pretty impressive scale. So we switched to Spot, and we had to implement a few strategies, but for us to make the switch. But for us, what we discovered is that by following the EC2 best practices, we were able to make it easier to transition to Spot and get all the benefits and unlock the benefits of Spot. So by implementing some of those EC2 best practices, we were able to make our infrastructure more stable across the board, but also had the added benefit of being able to turn our infrastructure over onto Spot EC2s. So best practices like interruption tolerance. So our application can be interrupted at any time. This is good for Spot because you can get interruptions, but it's also good for other things because there's a long list of things that can cause an interruption in your application. We're prepared for any of that. We've designed our application in a way that is ready for any interruption. We also use statelessness. So our applications minimize the amount of state that we store in the application. Instead, we rely on other AWS services. So complementary AWS services like databases and storage services, DynamoDB on the database side and S3 on the storage side, which helps us reduce the amount of state that we store on the EC2 instance, either on the disk or in memory. And what that helps us do is when there is an interruption, we don't lose much. We have all of our data stored in these complementary AWS services. And the third one is related, fast cold start. We want to be able to restart our application very quickly on a new EC2. And what we target is a sub 2-minute startup time. So that's related to both interruption tolerance and statelessness. So minimizing that state allows us to start up faster. We're also diversifying across instance types. Because the way the Spot market works, it's segmented by instance type, by availability zone, and by region. So we're able to use other features in the Spot, EC2 Spot service, like Spot Fleet, to diversify our bids across multiple dimensions. That mainly includes, in the case of Spot Fleet, instance types. So we're able to bid on multiple instance types at once and get the best blend of stability from a diversity perspective and price. ECS is another complementary service that allows us to move our applications around and run our applications on any type of instance. So our applications are no longer bound to a particular type of EC2 instance. They're instance independent. And then it allows us to move our applications very quickly. Our running applications, we can move from instance to instance very quickly with ECS. What that allows us to do is enables things like fast cold start. It enables interruption tolerance, because we can really run our application on any underlying EC2 and then move it around very quickly when the underlying EC2 market or landscape changes. So the results of this are pretty stunning. Our consumption of compute hours has increased by over 1,000% since last year. Massive amount of growth, both on the data processing side of things and on the API, serving our customers with our API side. But despite this massive growth, our COGS actually decreased and our margins increased. Our average monthly compute costs overall, depending on the service, that savings ranges from 80 and 90%. So pretty massive results. And overall, we're able to use Spot now to experiment on new products and start building new products without really thinking too much about the cost, because we know we're going to be running at an extremely low cost to start, and we don't have to worry too much about considering how much an R&D project might cost on the computing side. So it's enabling us to move faster on our new products as well. And with that, I think we'll transition over to questions.
So first of all, thank you very much, everybody, for submitting a lot of questions in the Q&A section within our webinar. We're trying to answer them as they come in, but we did reserve a couple of questions for public answers for everybody to hear here during the webinar. So I'm going to start off with the first question we got for IDC, actually. Maybe, Matt, you can take this one. What is the most interesting observation that IDC obtained from customer interviews during the study?
Actually, I can take that. This is Larry Carvalho. But what we have seen is, they're crafting solutions with Spot as a purchasing option. So this is an interesting dynamic and see, in how the customers, we can use Spot. But now when we build any new application, not just ones which were, specifically for batch or stateless or, test dev, that we should have this as an option because of what Joshua talked earlier, that regardless of where you bid for it, you're going to get market price. So people are seeing the value and really leveraging that to their advantage.
Okay, thank you. Another question for Joshua. How is a Spot instance different than an on-demand instance or reserved instance?
Thanks, Sebastian. One of the things I mentioned earlier is although we call them Spot instances and on-demand instances and reserved instances, fundamentally it's the same type of instance, the same amount of memory, the same amount of CPUs, the same amount of network performance, the same access to EBS, S3, other AWS services. So at a fundamental level, any application can run on any of those type of instances. If you can run on a specific type of instance for on-demand, absent being uninterruptible, you can run on the exact same Spot instance, and similarly, you can run on a reserved instance. So they're really actually purchasing models versus different instance types.
Okay, we had another question. This one is for Will from Mapbox. It wanted or desired a little bit more technical detail around what a fast cold start meant when you talked about best practices using Spot.
Yeah, that's a good question. Fast cold start, we really focus on being able to go from a new EC2 instance to a functioning and in production EC2 instance as quickly as possible. So sort of the gap between when the EC2 enters the running state, or like when the run instance command is run, basically, to when you can use that instance to start serving customers, that we track that gap very carefully, and we analyze the breakdown of where our time is going in that window, and we try and minimize that. So to give you a frame of reference, it used to take us 20 minutes to get from a brand new instance to a functioning instance that was ready to, for example, become healthy in a load balancer or start processing jobs from an SQS queue. And now what we've done is adjust our architecture so that time, we've limited that time wherever possible to below 2 minutes. And what that really allows us to do, I see some conversation about termination notifications. And you get a 2-minute warning from the Spot service, when your instance is about to be interrupted. And that 2 minutes, it's not a coincidence that we targeted 2 minutes. that when we get that notification, we're able to launch other instances. So when we have instance A is about to be terminated, we get that notification. We quickly launch another instance, use ECS to move all of our containers, all of our applications over to the new instance, and then we let the original instance, instance A, be terminated. And our customers don't notice a thing because we keep humming along, but we just swapped out our instance that's about to be terminated with one that is more stable. So we're able to keep saving money, but our customers are none the wiser about how we're actually moving applications around on the underlying EC2 infrastructure.
Thank you. The next question we have is for Joshua again. It was, can I have a single auto-scaling group with both on-demand and spot instances so I can scale on-demand when I can't get spot for the price I want?
Thanks, Sebastian. It's a really interesting question. Currently, inside of auto-scaling, if you want to use spot and on-demand, you actually have to set up separate auto-scaling groups. So you'd have one auto-scaling group for your on-demand instances, another auto-scaling group for your spot instance. You can use CloudWatch events or other mechanisms to scale up and down either your spot or your on-demand instances, depending on your application load or other factors. One thing we caution people against, though, is falling back to on-demand when they can't get access to a spot instance and run into scenarios where, if you think about it, spot is spare on-demand capacity. So if we are running very low on spot instance capacity, it's also possible that we could be running low on-demand capacity as well. So really the best practice for people is to spin up a base of on-demand or reserved instances, either first or alongside their spot instances, and scale up and down using spot. And as Will mentioned, if you're using spot fleet and diversifying across multiple instance types, multiple instance sizes, and multiple availability zones, you're rarely going to run into a situation where you're actually not able to get the spot instances you need. And as Will also mentioned, you can use Spot Fleet, which is our API, to diversify automatically and actually automatically replenish instances in another pool if one pool has those instances terminated.
The next question is for the embedded or type of their EC2 Spot instances.
Yeah, this is Matt. I can take this one. Across the board, these organizations describe the criticality either critical or very critical. Several of them did mention that they've taken steps to architect their use of EC2 Spot in a way that allows them to avoid breaks of service, or they mentioned that they are running workloads that can withstand very occasional brief interruptions. So that's how these organizations describe the workloads they're running on Spot.
Thank you. I have another question for Joshua. How many Spot instances can I request?
It's another good question, Sebastian. And ultimately, the answer is it depends on your underlying EC2 instance limits. We, of course, try to protect people, and depending on how long you've been using EC2 and what limits you set for yourself as an organization, you can get more or less Spot instances in different regions and for different instance sizes. So ultimately, it's driven by these underlying limits. We have instances of customers, of course, who request that they not be allowed to start more than one instance at a time to kind of make sure they have total cost control for their organization. And then we have other customers who are starting thousands of instances in a single spot or spot fleet request.
And then a follow-on question, again for Joshua, is which operating systems are available on EC2 Spot instances today?
Currently, we support both Linux and Windows. The only thing we don't support is Windows running SQL Server on Spot, although, of course, we always caution people against running their databases on Spot anyway. We really wouldn't want people to get data corruption.
And there are a lot of questions. I'm going to summarize them here a little bit around EC2 Spot fleet requests. One that came up a couple of times is just the question of if there's an additional charge around Spot fleet requests. And then there were a few questions around how Spot instance pools are specified in launch specifications and how Spot Fleet actually allocates resources across. So I know there's two questions here, but maybe just a little bit more information around Spot Fleet, pricing, if there is any, and how it operates across availability zones and instance types according to the launch specifications a customer would desire.
Sure, that's a great question. So Spot Fleet is free. There's no additional charge beyond the underlying Spot instance usage. You can launch, as I said, up to thousands of instances in a single Spot Fleet launch request. Of course, you're not required to, and this is driven by your limits. And currently, there are two options inside of Spot Fleet for telling us how you want your instances distributed. You can either tell us that these are all the instances, the types, the sizes, the availability zones that you're capable of using, but you want us to find the best price pool right now. Maybe you only want to find one Spot instance, but you don't want to figure out where the cheapest one is. If you select best price, we will kind of scour all the specs and all the different pools that you've specified, and we will find the best price pool or maybe the smallest number of pools that will fulfill that request. So that's really good for kind of a short-lived workload where you just need it to run and you want to find the best price right now. If you're running a stateless web tier or some other kind of batch application that runs for some long period of time, you're going to want to use the diversified option, which works very much like an index fund in the stock market, where you're distributing your Spot Fleet request over all the pools, and if you're using multiple availability zones, that can be across these multiple availability zones. So the benefit of diversified is that while you might pay slightly more than the most rock bottom price in a single pool, again, and availability, if you're running 1,000 instances in a single pool, it's unfortunately possible that you might lose that single pool and all of your instances go down at once. But if you're using 10 or 20 different pools, since these pools don't have correlated supply and demand curves, it's very unlikely that you would ever lose more than one pool at a time. And as I mentioned earlier, Spot Fleet will, if you tell us to, automatically replenish those instances in whatever pool those instances are available now based on your specs.
Thank you. I have one more question for Will from Mapbox. There's a question around how you got around to using EC2 Spot instances, if there were certain workloads or use cases that you moved to EC2 Spot instances first, if you maybe even started them on EC2 Spot or on demand. So a little bit more background sort of around your transition to on-demand or EC2 Spot instances as a company, and then for certain use cases or workloads.
Yeah, I think sort of our journey to Spot starts in a pretty typical way. We started with sort of offline data processing, large-scale data processing, where we needed to do, we were running over 1,000 EC2 instances on a data processing job, reading data out of a S3 bucket and distributing and managing a data processing job using SQS. So we had Spot EC2s reading out of an SQS queue and doing data processing. So I think that's a pretty typical way to start, and that's what we were doing is running a single type of instance, and when the price spiked and we had a Spot interruption, we just stopped doing the processing, which was fine in that situation. I think what's different about Mapbox is we kept going with the Spot journey. We started to move more and more services over, and then eventually, like, hey, we could actually use this for our online, mission critical, highly available services as well. All we need to do is be able to be super flexible and fast and agile about moving our applications around and what EC2s they're running and changing what EC2s we're using under the hood. So yeah, I think we started definitely on the data processing side, figuring out those batch jobs, the nightly jobs, and then we just didn't stop there. We kept going.
All right, thank you. So with the time that we have available, this concludes the Q&A session for this webinar, at least the live Q&A session. We will get to all the unanswered questions that are still outstanding, either via email or in the chat. But for now, I wanted to hand it back to Joshua to wrap it up for the webinar and give you a couple of final points around EC2 Spot instances and how you might be able to use them pretty soon.
Thanks, Sebastian. And I really appreciate all these great questions. There's obviously a lot to learn about Spot instances in the cloud, and depending on where you are in your journey, you're going to find different things as your next step. So again, I fully believe fundamentally that Amazon Web Services is a more cost-effective option than on-prem environments in both the short term and the long term. Innovative customers, such as the ones that IDC interviewed and the ones we heard from today, like Mapbox, are leveraging EC2 Spot along with on-demand and reserved instances to save big and accelerate their businesses. For those of you who want more detail, the slides from today's presentation will be distributed to you over email in the next few days. But as a next step, I actually hope you get started with Spot to turbo boost one of the applications you already have. If you've got a continuous integration workload and you're using Jenkins, there's an open source Spot Fleet plugin. 1, 2, maybe 3 lines of code change, and you could be saving thousands of dollars a month. If you're running a stateless web application, you want to look at maybe just creating a second auto-scaling group or using Spot Fleet to spin up and down in response to load. If you've got a big data workload, if you're using Hadoop, you're running Amazon EMR, Spot instances are already built in and you should be taking advantage of them. If you've got any other ideas that you want to experiment on or run a proof of concept, Spot instances are a great way to get started. You're going to save a massive amount of money, and as Will said, you're going to move on this journey where you suddenly find more and more opportunities over time to keep optimizing your cloud computing costs and optimizing the performance of your application. So with that in mind, I wanted to thank everybody for attending. Thank you again for all of your questions. Thank you to my co-presenters, and I hope you have a great day.